The first sound was the crash of a leather briefcase hitting the polished marble floor. People in the banking hall turned at once, their conversations stopping suddenly, as if someone switched off the noise in the room.
Oh my God!
The briefcase burst open, and bundles of fresh currency scattered across the floor like confetti at a celebration nobody expected. Then came the second sound, a heavy thud. That was the moment the billionaire fell. Mr. Smart lay face down beside the money he loved so much. His expensive wristwatch was still ticking. His phone was still ringing. His banker was still holding the document he had just signed for another multi-million investment. But the man himself, the empire builder, the unstoppable businessman everyone feared and admired, was not moving. A security guard rushed forward first. "Sir, sir!" Another man quickly knelt beside him and tried to turn him over. His face was pale and sweat soaked his shirt. His breathing was shallow and uneven. Someone shouted loudly, "Call an ambulance!" Another voice whispered nervously, "Isn't that Mr. Smart?" Yes, it was him, the billionaire who owned half the buildings in the city, the man who never slowed down, the man who believed hospitals were for weak people. And as he lay there on the cold marble floor of the bank, unconscious, one thing was painfully clear. For the first time in his life, money could not save him. But the truth was, this moment had been building for many years. Years of ignored warnings, years of postponed hospital visits, years of believing wealth made him untouchable. If anyone had told Mr. Smart that his own body would one day betray him in the middle of a bank transaction, he would have laughed loudly, because men like him did not believe in limits. They believed in profit. They believed in hustle. They believed in expanding markets, rising sales, and endless opportunities. Health? That was something to think about later, much later. Long before the day he collapsed in the bank, Mr. Smart had built his life around one simple rule: money first, everything else later. He was not born rich. In fact, his childhood was very poor. He grew up in a small two-room house where rainwater leaked through the roof whenever it rained, and his mother struggled every day just to feed the family. As a boy, Smart hated poverty deeply. He watched wealthy men drive past his street in shiny cars, while his father struggled to pay rent. He watched his mother pretend she was not hungry so the children could eat. And in his young heart, he made a silent promise to himself: "One day I will be richer than all of them." That promise became his obsession. While other children played football in dusty streets, Smart sold oranges at bus stops. While his classmates spent pocket money on snacks, he saved every coin. While others slept, he read old business magazines he borrowed from a local shopkeeper. By the time he was in his 20s, Smart had already started trading electronics imported from overseas. He slept very little, worked almost every hour of the day, and took business risks that scared everyone around him. But the risks worked. His small shop slowly became a warehouse. The warehouse became a distribution company. The distribution company turned into a national business empire. Soon, Mr. Smart owned supermarkets, construction companies, transport services, and many real estate properties across several cities. Money entered his bank accounts faster than he could count it. Banks competed for his attention. Politicians invited him to private meetings. Young entrepreneurs asked him for advice and mentorship. He had become the kind of man newspapers proudly called self-made, and he loved that title. He loved everything about success: the respect, the influence, the control. But success came with a price he refused to notice. His schedule was extremely demanding. He woke up before sunrise and often worked past midnight. His breakfast was usually only coffee. Lunch was whatever food he could grab between meetings. Dinner sometimes happened at 1 in the morning after long negotiations. Sleep was optional. Exercise did not exist in his routine. Doctors? They were for people who had time to waste. His wife Grace often worried about him. One evening she watched him drink another cup of strong coffee while reading financial reports. "You should slow down," she said gently. "I'm fine," he replied without lifting his eyes from the papers.
you've been having headaches again. It's nothing. You said that last week. I'm just tired. You should see a doctor. Mr. Smart sighed impatiently. Grace, please, I have 3 meetings tomorrow and a flight in the evening. I don't have time for hospital drama. Grace did not argue again, but deep inside she knew something was wrong. Sometimes she noticed his hands shaking slightly. Sometimes she heard him breathing heavily after climbing the stairs. Once she saw him quietly rubbing his chest while standing alone on the balcony late at night. Still, every time she suggested a medical checkup, he dismissed the idea. There is nothing wrong with me. That sentence became his favorite response. Ironically, one of Mr. Smart's biggest investments was a large luxury office complex in the center of the city. Directly across the road from that building stood the best hospital in the entire city. It was a modern medical center with advanced equipment and experienced specialists. Every morning, Mr. Smart drove past it on his way to work. Every evening, he drove past it again when returning home. The hospital was so close, he could have walked there in 2 minutes, but he never entered the building, not even once. In fact, he sometimes joked about it. During one business meeting with partners, a man mentioned that he was going for his yearly health checkup. Mr. Smart laughed loudly. "Businessmen worry too much," he said confidently. "Hospitals only find problems when they want money." Everyone laughed along with him, but his body was not laughing. The headaches became stronger, the tiredness increased. Sometimes his vision became blurry while reading documents. He began shouting at employees for small mistakes. His patience disappeared quickly. His temper grew worse, yet he continued working harder than ever. He traveled constantly to different countries, London, Dubai, Singapore, Lagos, closing deals and expanding his business empire. His assistants admired his energy. His competitors feared his ambition, but his body was quietly reaching its limit. One afternoon, his personal driver noticed something unusual. They had just returned from the airport after a long trip. As Mr. Smart stepped out of the car, he suddenly held the door tightly for support. "Sir, are you okay?" the driver asked with concern. "I'm fine," Mr. Smart muttered, but sweat covered his forehead even though the weather was cool. "You should rest, sir," the driver said again. "I said I'm fine." Mr. Smart walked into the office building with determination, ignoring the heavy pounding in his head. Inside his office, he poured himself another cup of coffee, then another, then another. Slowly, the pounding in his head faded, but the damage inside his body continued growing quietly. Months later, during a corporate dinner event, a friend leaned close and spoke softly. "You look tired, Smart." "I'm just busy." "You should check your blood pressure." Mr. Smart laughed again. "My blood pressure is strong like my business." His friend did not laugh, because he had seen this story before. Many powerful men believed they were unstoppable, until they were not. But nobody could convince Mr. Smart otherwise. Not his wife, not his friends, not even his own body. And that stubborn belief pushed him straight towards the day everything collapsed. The day he walked into the bank carrying millions in documents and confidence. The day his heart started beating strangely while signing papers. The day the room slowly began to spin. The day he ignored the warning signs for the last time. Moments later, his briefcase slipped from his hand. Money scattered across the floor, and the billionaire who owned half the city collapsed beside it. As people gathered around him in panic, an elderly man in the crowd spoke quietly. Sometimes a man spends his whole life chasing wealth before he can enjoy it. Across the street from the bank stood the hospital Mr. Smart had ignored for many years. Its emergency lights flashed as the ambulance rushed towards the entrance, and for the first time in his life, Mr. Smart was finally going there, not as a visitor, but as a patient fighting for his life. And as the ambulance doors closed, his wife's phone began ringing with the call that would change everything. But the real tragedy of Mr. Smart's story had not yet been revealed, because the doctors inside that hospital were about to discover something that would shock the entire business community. And when the truth finally came out, every billionaire in the city would learn a frightening lesson. Success means nothing if you are too busy to stay alive. Inside the treatment room, Mr. Smart's body lay still while machines monitored every movement of his heart. Doctors injected medication to lower his blood pressure. A nurse carefully checked his pulse again. Slowly, after what felt like endless minutes, his breathing became steadier. The doctor sighed quietly. "He's stabilizing." Outside the room, Grace sat with both hands clasped together, praying silently. For the first time in many years, the powerful billionaire's fate was no longer in his own control. Hours later, Mr. Smart slowly opened his eyes. The bright hospital lights hurt his vision at first. He blinked slowly and looked around the room. Tubes were connected to his arm. Machines stood beside his bed, making soft beeping sounds. For a moment, he could not understand where he was. Then he saw the hospital ceiling, and the memory returned suddenly. The bank, the dizziness, the fall. His chest tightened slightly. A doctor stepped closer and spoke gently. "Mr. Smart, can you hear me?" Mr. Smart nodded weakly. His voice came out dry and quiet. Where am I?" "You're in the hospital." The words felt strange in his ears. The hospital, the place he had avoided his entire life. The doctor continued speaking. "You collapsed because your blood pressure became extremely high. You're lucky people acted quickly." Mr. Smart closed his eyes slowly. For the first time in many years, he felt something unfamiliar. Fear. Real fear. A few minutes later, Grace entered the room. Her eyes were red from crying. When she saw him awake, tears rolled down her cheeks again. She held his hand gently. "Thank God you're alive." Mr. Smart looked at her quietly. For once, he had no confident reply. The doctor returned later with test results. His expression was serious. "Mr. Smart, I need to be honest with you." Mr. Smart listened silently. "Your blood pressure has likely been dangerously high for a long time. This has already started affecting your heart and other organs." The room became very quiet. The doctor continued calmly. "If you had not received treatment today, the result could have been far worse. It could have been a stroke or even death." Mr. Smart swallowed slowly. For years he had faced business risks without fear, but this was different. No amount of money could negotiate with his own body. What was the purpose of owning companies across the country if his own heart could stop tomorrow? What was the value of millions in the bank if he was too sick to enjoy life? As he lay there thinking, he remembered something painful. The hospital across from his office. For years it had been standing there, waiting silently, a place where he could have walked in for a simple checkup, 2 minutes of his time, but he had always been too busy. The next morning, the doctor visited again. "Mr. Smart, you will need to make serious changes in your lifestyle." Mr. Smart listened carefully this time. "You must reduce stress, improve your diet, exercise regularly, and attend medical checkups." For the first time in many years, Mr. Smart nodded without argument. News of his collapse spread quickly through the business world. Investors called to ask about his health. Business partners sent messages of concern. Many people were shocked. The man who seemed unstoppable had nearly died in a bank hall. A week later, Mr. Smart was strong enough to sit up and receive visitors. One afternoon, a group of young entrepreneurs came to see him. They admired him greatly and often followed his advice about business success. One of them said, "Sir, we heard what happened. We're glad you survived." Mr. Smart looked at them quietly for a moment. Then he spoke slowly. "For many years, I believed money was the most important thing in life." The young men listened carefully. "I worked every hour of the day to build my empire. I postponed rest. I postponed family time. I even postponed my health." He paused before continuing. "But the day I collapsed in the bank, I learned a lesson no billionaire should ignore." The room was silent. Mr. Smart continued. "Money can build hospitals, but money cannot replace a damaged heart. Wealth can buy medicine, but it cannot buy a new life when time runs out." The young men nodded thoughtfully. Mr. Smart looked out the hospital window toward the busy city. His voice became softer. Success is meaningless if you are too sick to enjoy it. That moment marked the beginning of a new chapter in Mr. Smart's life. When he finally returned to his office weeks later, the first thing he did was schedule regular medical checkups for himself and his entire staff. He also started a health program in his companies, encouraging employees to care for their bodies as much as their careers. For the first time in many years, he walked across the street to the hospital, not as an emergency patient, but for a routine checkup. As he entered the building, he smiled quietly. Sometimes, life gives a man a warning before it is too late. Mr. Smart was fortunate to receive that warning, and from that day forward, he carried one lesson everywhere he went. A wise man builds wealth, but a wiser man protects his health.
This is Beyond Stories, where every story carries a lesson, and every lesson touches the heart. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story that could inspire your next step.